Before 1855, Mexican children did attend Anglo schools, but after the Mexican-American War and the Treaty of Guadalupe-Hidalgo was signed, many states changed the laws. In California, the state legislature said that school boards could not use public funds to educate non-white students. By 1864, all non-white students in the state of California were attending separate schools than Anglo students. During this time, Mexicans were not the only ones being segregated. Asians, Native Americans, and African Americans were also being segregated from Anglo students. In 1896, the case Plessy v. Ferguson was tried in front of the Supreme Court. This made an outcome that segregation was indeed constitutional, but the facilities of Anglo students and Mexican students had to be equal. In September 1943, Sylvia Mendez and her two brothers went with their aunt and cousins to enroll in a school in Westminster, California. The school informed Mendez's aunt that since her kids were only half Mexican, had a French last name, and were light-skinned, that they could enroll in the school. According to school officials, the Mendez children could not enroll in the school because they were dark-skinned and had a Mexican last name. The school told the aunt to enroll the Mendez children in the Mexican school that was 10 blocks away. Once the Mendez family found out that their children would have to attend a segregated school, they became furious. The Mendez father, Gonzalo, went to the superintendent and to the Orange County School District to discuss enrolling his children in the Westminster School. When both the superintendent and the school district denied the Mendez children in attending the Westminster School, the Mendez family sued the Westminster School District. The Mendez family hired a Los Angeles civil rights attorney, David Marcus. On March 2, 1945, Marcus filed Mendez v. Westminster, which ended up being a class action lawsuit against 4 different school districts. These included Westminster, Santa Ana, Garden Grove, and El Modena. The Mendez family and Marcus were looking for these schools to not only stop segregation, but to also integrate different races. For roughly 5,000 students that had been segregated, 4 other Mexican-American families were fighting for desegregation along with the Mendez family. These families included Thomas Estrada, William Guzman, Frank Palomino, and Lorenzo Ramirez. The Mendez v. Westminster trial started on July 5, 1945 in the federal court in Los Angeles. Marcus argued that the Mexican schools the Mexican-American children were attending were not near as nice and the materials were inferior to the Anglo schools. Marcus also argued that the Mexican children were not given a language test and they were being segregated not based on their knowledge. They were simply being segregated for being of the Mexican race. This, Marcus claimed, was violating the Equal Protection Clause under the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution. The school district's lawyer claimed that Mexican students were being segregated so that they could receive language classes, and that when the Mexican children had become fluent in English, they would then be integrated back into the Anglo schools. On March 18, 1946, Judge Paul J. McCormick ruled that the segregation prevalent in the defendant school districts foster antagonism in the children and suggest inferiority among them where none exist, and that the Equal Protection Clause had been violated. The school district tried appealing the decision, but on April 14, 1947, their appeal was denied. Shortly after the ruling of Mendez v. Westminster, the governor of California, Earl Warren, pushed for desegregation of all different races, such as Native Americans and Asians. The case ended de jure segregation. On July 23, 1930, the PTA, the school board, and the Chamber of Commerce of Lemon Grove, California met for a meeting to discuss the situation of the 75 Mexican students that attended the grammar school. They decided that they would build a separate school for Mexican students to attend, but there was no notice given to the Mexican students' parents about the decision about a separate school. On January 5, 1931, the principal, Mr. Green, stood outside the grammar school and rejected the Mexican children from entering the grammar school. The Mexican children were then escorted to the new school called La Cabezilla, which means the barn. After the students parents found out about this new school, they were absolutely furious. The Mexican students' parents formed La Comité de Vecinos de Lemon Grove. Most of the Mexican students' parents decided that they would not send their children to the new school. Instead, they would send them to their normal school. When the students were then sent to the new school again, and the children then left the new school and returned home. The Mexican students' parents hired a lawyer and filed a lawsuit against the Lemon Grove School for segregating their students. On February 24, 1931, the trial began. The Mexican students' parents chose a student named Roberto Alvarez to be the plaintiff during the trial. Lemon Grove School was making false claims about the Mexican-American students. For example, the Lemon Grove School claimed that Mexican-American children were deficient in their knowledge of the English language and they learned at a much slower rate. This was a false claim because one of the Mexican-American students that was segregated did not know any Spanish but instead only spoke English. Also, most of these Mexican-American students had not been formally tested, so there was no concrete proof that these students learned slower or were behind in their learning. On May 30th, 1931, Judge Chambers made a ruling. Judge Chambers stated, "I understand that you can separate a few children to improve their education if they need special instruction, but to separate all the Mexicans in one group can only be done by infringing the laws of the state of California. And I do not blame the Mexican children because a few of them are behind in schoolwork for this segregation. On the contrary, this is a fact in their favor. I believe that this separation denies the Mexican children the presence of the American children, which is so necessary to learn the English language." The Lemon Grove and Mendez versus Westminster cases are important to the education of Mexican-American students. Even though the cases took place over 80 years ago, segregation of Mexican-American students still exists. Many times, Mexican-American students are pulled out of their classrooms to attend classes to better their English and spend less and less time with students of all different races. Many times, Mexican-American students are ashamed to speak Spanish at school or show any of their Mexican heritage because they are afraid that students will mock them. As teachers, it is important to teach all students about different cultures so kids will learn to accept all different cultures. At Mexican American Studies 275, students have been learning about the culture of Mexican Americans and how to better their education experience. The Lemon Grove incident and Mendez versus Westminster teaches the fact that segregation based on race and culture is completely unacceptable. It is important to teach all students, no matter their race, that different cultures are unique, but that in no way, shape, or form makes any culture less human. At the end of the day, teachers need to make sure that they are doing their absolute best to ensure that each student is receiving an education that is safe, excellent, and equal.